I often find that the most resonant type of horror often relates to fears most universal to the human condition. In the case of the latest A24 horror film, Talk to Me, we have one that, much like Stephen King's Pet Sematary, specifically the book, effectively deals with the fear of death, our lack of knowledge to what lies on the other side, and the potential dangers behind trying to instigate contact with it, how that could even create grotesque and unnatural situations between you and your loved ones past. Talk to Me follows a group of friends who discover the embalmed hand of a psychic, which they can use in a ritual to contact the dead as they light a candle to open a portal to the other side. The people performing this ritual have to say the words, "Talk to me," followed by, "I let you in," to, as you'd probably guess, let the spirit in. But they must be careful to blow out the candle, thus closing the portal after 90 seconds. Otherwise, the spirits will want to stay. Typically, when it comes to A24 horror, their reputation tends to lead more towards art horror, inspired by the works of Roman Polanski, the type of horror that may place an emphasis on its thematic heft, feature slow-paced editing, and might even feature scenes that detour from the narrative, using surreal imagery, often to back up the themes on display. In the case of Talk to Me, it doesn't feel like most A24 horror films, possibly because this is one of the ones that they simply distributed rather than one that they produced. The focus here is definitely on the human element, and the story told is quite gripping. Shortly after the film's excellent introduction, featuring an immaculate one-take tracking shot, we're brought into the world of our main character by the name of Mia, and are let in on a very dark aspect of her family's past. One that reaps a lot of poignant personal drama that complements the horror elements like peanut butter and jelly. It was the emphasis on character development first, and scares secondary, that made this film really work for me, and it's something I wish more horror films set out to do, as it often makes the scares hit that much harder as a result. Because the film emphasizes the human element so much, that could lead to many feeling this film has several slow moments between the very effective scares. But for me, I was never bored for a second, and from my perception, the film had barely any fat to be trimmed. This is the directorial debut of the Filippo brothers, who were previously known for the YouTube channel Raka Raka. Now, I will admit, I wasn't familiar with this channel before I looked into these guys, but I'm honestly blown away by the seamless cinematic transition these guys have achieved into the world of prestige horror. I would have never guessed from the style of the direction that these guys got their start from a YouTube channel. Whereas on the other hand, as much as I love Daniels, the directorial team behind Swiss Army Man and Everything Everywhere All at Once, the second I heard that they got their start directing music videos, I was not surprised one bit. But in the case of the Filippo brothers, especially after watching a few of their videos, the light tone and playful nature of their videos is nowhere to be found here, though I suppose maybe their knack for impressive practical effects comes into play. Their style of direction is appropriately personal, if not necessarily the most dynamic I've ever seen. It doesn't need to be though, for the particular type of story that they're telling. I particularly took note of their frequent use of shallow focus and even of rack focus, which always seem to perfectly illustrate the characters' connection with one another, or lack thereof in certain cases. Additionally, when it comes to the scares, they are always creative and range from disgustingly brutal to so creepy it will make the hair on the back of your neck stand. Best of all, for all of the more mainstream style scares out there are moments that beg to go for cliché loud noises. But these moments are resisted at every turn, usually letting the abrupt and unsettling imagery be what truly makes the audience jump. Any issue that I had with Talk to Me were mostly issues that I had sitting in the theater while I was watching the film, but retroactively, I've actually debunked all of those upon finishing the film and thinking back to it, as I realized that everything had worked really well. Part of me did feel the film was a bit slow for the first third of it, and it wasn't necessarily because I was bored, but more so I was a bit shocked by not only how quickly they got into the ritual, knowing the usual slow burn reputation that A24 films have, but also how much they showed early on. And I'm usually not a fan of when horror films show too much too early. For that reason, I thought the various ritual scenes got a little repetitive, and I was wondering if the movie would ever take things any further, or if we had already peaked. Luckily, my patience paid off big time. because by the end of the first act, there was a scene so gruesome that my jaw dropped to the floor, and I almost was tempted to look away from the screen, which for me is saying a lot. By that moment, I was thoroughly hooked, and I knew I was in for a dark ride, and oh, believe me, from that point on, the movie gets darker and darker the further it progresses. One element of the film I predict will get some flack is the common complaint of dumb character decisions. This is a complaint that is often thrown at horror films, and it usually is justified for the most part. In the case of Talk to Me, the characters know full well the consequences of this ritual from the very beginning, and yet they instigate it over and over again, and I'm sure that aspect will bother many who see this movie. The reason it worked so well for me, though, is because you really get the impression of the high that these kids are getting, and that it is equivalent to that of doing drugs. Much like the worst of drugs out there, the abuser is well aware that it's not good for them, but they can't help it because it's an addiction. I also remember when I was about the age of these characters, me and my friends used to make fun trips to the legendary haunted bus stop of Ventura. And during these trips, our silly little EVP coder app on our phone would say cryptic things like strangle, choke, or death, and we wouldn't leave the place because we, of course, know that stuff isn't real. That's another thing I think people need to remember, is that these characters in these movies, they don't know they're in a movie, and without these decisions, we don't have the movie. My only genuine issue with Talk to Me is really more of a nitpick than anything, and it is one particular scene. It's like the third or fourth time that our characters are playing with the hand, and it's executed in a very light and almost montage-like fashion that just doesn't feel like it fits in the movie. This is probably the one scene that sort of made me feel like I was watching a film from two guys who used to be YouTubers, and it could even lead audiences to believe that the film was going in a lighter direction. Other than that, though, I think this is a near-perfect horror film, and any other issues I thought I had while watching the movie are ones I don't stand by after having finished the journey. Overall, guys, I highly recommend Talk to Me. The year's about half over, but I am convinced that this is the #1 horror film of 2023, and I would be shocked if anything else ended up beating it by the year's conclusion. The film is very well scripted, it's got great characters, a great human element, provides great food for thought, and it has some harrowing and truly unforgettable scares. That's it for me today, guys. Talk to Me was directed by Michael and Danny Filippo, and I'm giving this film a 4.5 out of 5. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of The Lens of Recommendations. If you enjoyed Talk to Me, I also recommend The Dark and the Wicked, which has a similar mainstream style of horror to it without abandoning those A24 vibes, as the cool kids say, in spite of it not being an A24 horror film. It also features similar hallucinatory sequences of characters being tricked by the supernatural into doing grisly and disturbing things. The atmosphere in this one is so thick and dreadful, it's almost suffocating, and in my opinion is the best work so far by director Brian Bertino, who previously gave us The Strangers and The Monster. My other recommendation goes to The Innkeepers from Ty West. Yes, long before Ty West gave us recent A24 horror gems like X and Pearl, he gave us a supernatural outlier, The Innkeepers, which also has a very character-centric focus and boasts those classic Stephen King vibes that I was just mentioning. And while The Innkeepers does take things a little bit lighter at first with some more comedy, believe me, the journey gets very dark as it progresses, and without getting into spoilers, I think has a very similar thematic weight that Talk to Me does. If you guys like what I do here, please consider hitting the thumbs up and subscribing, and maybe even checking out some other projects that I'm involved with, all of which will be linked below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and see you in the next video.